Thank you, everyone, for the welcoming remarks. We are energized by your comments and excited to start our first session of the day, Building the Cities We Want, with our keynote speaker, Helen Kerr, co-president of Kerr Smith Design and a practitioner in residence with the University of Waterloo's Faculty of Environment Future Cities Initiative.
In today's session, Helen will help provide insights into questions about how we can prepare for uncertainty while creating healthy, inclusively prosperous, and regenerative urban spaces. This session will investigate systemic, interdisciplinary approaches to urban futures as a path forward.
We are lucky to have Helen here in person and speaking to our online conference community. Before we welcome Helen to the stage, we'd like to take a minute to share a little about her.
Helen Kerr has over 25 years' experience as the leader of one of North America's preeminent research-driven innovation and implementation companies. With degrees in both environmental studies and industrial design, her work crosses the boundaries of design, foresight, and strategy. Helen holds over 40 product process patents and is recognized by the Canadian government for her experimental work. Multidisciplinary approaches to highly complex problems have been her undercurrent of her career.
Helen has lectured and written extensively on research, strategy, design, and innovation. In May 2012, she was the focus of a CBC documentary film entitled Great Minds of Design. Helen was admitted to the Royal Canadian Academy of Arts this year.
Welcome to the stage, Helen.
Thank you so much. I'm blushing. I just want to say that, it's very inspiring beginning to have that kind of thankfulness message and something for us all to really take to heart, and also to know from Elder Miller, and also to know the commitment that the University of Waterloo has to the SDGs and the intention to push forward to do really great things. I've seen it firsthand, and I know it's true. So I'm here today to talk a bit about cities, but also just about the future. So we live in really turbulent times. That's no surprise, everybody knows that. But let's kind of go into it a little bit this morning, and then think about what that means for cities and for the work that you do also. I'm a practicing foresighter. Most of you might not know what that is. That means that I have to think about the future all the time while I'm trying to practice in the present, which is kind of weird. People ask me to help them prepare both for the future that they want. That's a really important thing, to think about where you want to get to, but also to prepare for the futures that we might get, whether we want it or not. And I would say that at this moment in time, I'm not only going to talk about doom and gloom, but at this moment in time, we are really struggling. You might even say that we're in a moment of polycrisis. And so what does that mean? It means that we have compounding issues that are building one upon the other to make really challenging situations happen around us. So let's drive into what is driving that change right in this moment. So as a futurist, I'm always thinking about what are the larger conditions that may have long-term impact going forward. So let's talk about some of those right now. So the first thing is, again, no surprise, Canada is an aging society. In fact, the whole globe is aging. And what does that actually mean for us? It means we have a depth of wisdom and experience, that's great, but we also have the challenges that an aging population faces. So I can barely see you, but raise your hand if you're under 40 right now. Yeah, that's a whole bunch of you. So in 20 years, you are going to be creeping up quite a bit. right? Some of you are going to be 65, which currently is the moment when people retire. And so when the majority, or a large portion of the population, more proportionately than ever before, is older, how is that going to change us? So just think about that for a while, and we'll talk about it about cities in a minute. We also are living in a moment of incredible technological advancement. We have automation that is helping us do things that we weren't able to do before. It's helping some of those older people function more effectively. And we also have the really rapid change of artificial intelligence that's creeping into so many places. It's an incredible gift in many ways, but it's also a challenge. Right? So what is going to happen as AI proliferates within our world? So Elon Musk, not necessarily who I would look to for advice, but Elon Musk just recently said all jobs would be eliminated really soon, by 2030, he said. He just said that last week. That's kind of shocking, right? What are we going to do in a world where all jobs are replaced? We know that incredible wealth has been generated through the advance of all that technology, which is an incredible gift, again. But that wealth is highly concentrated. It's focused in a way in very intentional places with very few people and not distributed to the wide world. And so what's the implication of that going forward? We know that around the world there have been recent wars that are preoccupying us in many ways, the ones that we know about and we pay attention to, and then the ones that are more quiet in the background that are happening and nonetheless affecting people in really dramatic ways. So in places like Sudan, where there is intense civil unrest. And in this report, so on an annual basis, the Council of Foreign Relations identifies areas of the world that they're worried about, and they rank it by color coding. And so, interestingly, they put red, highest alert, on the United States this year. And so, what is that going to mean to us? We're right next door to the United States. And so where is that kind of leading as we go forward? We know that people are trying to escape war-torn areas and also places where they have limited opportunities going forward. They may be facing hunger, they may be facing sort of environmental conditions. And so involuntary migration is ramping up to an unprecedented level around the world. Sometimes people move within the countries that they live in, but often they are moving further afield away from their home. We know that one of the causes of that is the kind of extreme weather that we're encountering on a really regular basis. Yesterday, I believe, a major cyclone swept through India and Bangladesh. And on Memorial Day, throughout the United States, there was major destruction from heavy storms. We are facing it. Even when I arrived here yesterday, I talked to somebody who said, "Are you okay? There's a hurricane warning." And I was like, "Really?" They said, "Oh no, maybe it's a tornado warning." I was like, those are kind of different, right? But nonetheless, it was a warning. And in the end, it was just sprinkles of rain, but it could have been way worse. But we face that on a regular basis, and the implications are kind of huge, right? For agriculture and for our homes and for transportation, for all the things that we think about on a daily basis. In fact, the issue of environmental change is such a big future threat that the World Economic Forum, not a place that generally kind of has entirely liberal views of things, ranks, they do, again on an annual basis, a 2-year forward question about, what are the biggest risks that we face. And so in the next 2 years, they identified misinformation and disinformation. I know you can't really see those. And some issues about extreme weather. But going forward 10 years, they rank 5 of the top 10 issues are concerned with environmental distress. So both extreme weather and change in Earth systems, biodiversity loss, pollution, all those kinds of things. 5 out of 10 of the key risks going forward 10 years they estimate are related to environmental strain. That's a really big deal. Are people prepared for that? I'm not sure. And the other thing that we look at on a regular basis is we're always thinking about health and how health trajectories are moving. And so we've been through a pandemic. It was a really tough time for everybody. Was anybody prepared for that? How many of you were ready for the pandemic? Really ready? There are no hands up. Okay, so as a foresighter, we were projecting that forward, and when we told people, they said, that's never going to happen, that's so extreme. Why are you even including that in your projections forward? But it's critical, right? It's a critical thing for us to be thinking about. Is it going to happen again? Absolutely, right? Absolutely. Are we ready? Medium, right? And so part of the work that you need to do, no matter what industry you work in, whatever sector you're in, is to be thinking about what those implications might be. So is it any surprise that we have this overwhelming, I would say, crisis, like I said at the beginning, a polycrisis? When we're facing all those things, is it any surprise that there's a crisis also of mental health, right? On a minor level, on a major level, overwhelming, and particularly for young people right now. So all of that is happening all around us. What does that have to do with cities, right? So that's the work that I do, is I'm always looking forward. And many of those things might be things that you had already thought about, but the work that I need to do for my clients and for governments is to think about what the intersection of those things might be and how we need to respond, both with policies or with products and services that need to be prepared so that people can cope with the futures that you might get, whether you want them or not, in order eventually to get to the futures that you want. So the first things to be thinking about is those issues that I talked about. How do they translate into issues in cities? So many people in cities are seniors currently, and they're going to be older seniors as we move into the future. By, I think it's 2050, there will be estimated over 100,000 centenarians in Canada, people over 100 years old. And already, within the next 20 years, there's an expectation that a quarter of the population will be over 65. A quarter of the population. That's a very large amount. So those people will need different kinds of health care. They're also going to need different kinds of housing situations. So after this presentation, we're going to have a housing panel to talk about some of those things. We're in a moment where we're thinking about housing so intensely all through Ontario and across Canada, but we're thinking about the kind of housing that we want and need now, but what kind of housing will we want and need 20 years from now? Will it be the same? So if you are going to be a senior at that point in time, will you be able to live in the same kind of house? We need to think about that. What kind of healthcare we deliver? What kind of transportation are we going to deliver? So as people enter into their 80s, particularly their elder 80s, maybe they're not going to be able to drive a car around anymore. And so if you live in a place, in a city that doesn't have concentrated services, how are people going to get around? Do they have enough transit and senior appropriate transit to be able to make the movements that they require within a city? So again, something to think about. We talked about technology and how great technology can be, but what the potential concerns for technology are. So the great thing is we can use technology to build smart cities, to look at smart buildings that use energy more efficiently and all kinds of energy applications appropriately. We can think about smart transportation that maybe is on demand using data. We can even think about how food is grown in a in a city, maybe with vertical farming or whatever, using data and advanced technologies in a really great way. But the other side effect of that is that advanced technology has the potential to be used as surveillance. How do we avoid that in a city? And it can be used to sort of change the relationship between citizens and government. How do you talk to each other when technology is so much in play? And also, there's the potential for job loss. So most of the time when people talk about new technology and people are fearful of the advances of technology, there's a rebut that says, well, no, it's good. It will augment the jobs that we have. But very recent research also says about 30% of jobs are likely to be lost, never to be replaced, for people who particularly don't have the skills to be able to transition into a high technology world. So what is that going to mean for a city, right, where we have concentrations of work? We have lots of people who no longer have the means to own a home. And so homelessness has increased across the country and is concentrated often. It happens in rural areas as well, but it's concentrated often in cities. And the response to it is still insufficient for people to have the well-being that they require. If you live in a place that has had really severe destruction of your city, how are you going to rebuild that, right? So urban fighting often destroys or damages the critical infrastructure necessary to supply vital services, such as electricity, water, and sanitation, healthcare, food, or education. And so there's places around the world that, so in Gaza and in Ukraine particularly, where complete destruction of the city centers and the surrounding areas means that there's no longer the ability to have the kind of necessary infrastructure that you require. And so on the first level, how can you live in those places? And on the second level, how can we rebuild those places? There is continuous protest, and as people come together, even in our areas, the increasing numbers of people from around the world that arrive in Canada may not always have the same point of view about global issues. And so on the, a great thing, we have democracy and the ability to speak our minds, and so protest is a really important piece of that, but civil protest is also important, and increasingly people feel that they need to really make a firm stand on their perspectives. What is going to happen in the future as those conflicts multiply and we have to feel what happens between peoples in our cities? Environmental concerns. So my office is right near the Don Valley, so it's right beside the DVP. It's along the DVP, the Don Valley Parkway. And although they are preparing to divert some of the water at the bottom of the DVP currently, when there's a major water event, it floods. It floods on a pretty regular basis. And so this is not very far from my office, where the entire roadway was flooded. It's pretty extreme, but more and more extreme events are happening within cities, disrupting major infrastructure. So if you're worried about a fire encroaching on your housing, that's a concern. If there's major drought in your area, that's a concern. If you're most likely in southern Ontario, close to a source of expanding water, that is really going to be a concern for you. And in fact, the insurance board suggests that most Canadians are ill-insured and insufficiently insured for flood in cities. And finally, for some people, when that mental kind of strain becomes too great, and people are unable to find the care that they need, some people turn to other forms of medication. And so the drug supply in Canada is increasingly available to people and increasingly toxic. And so if you live in a downtown area, or even if you don't live in a downtown area, you may encounter people who are trying to cope using medication of some type. And if they're using this kind of medication, they are at high risk, right? And so that's an issue that cities have to deal with. So that's a lot of bad news. But maybe we can do something about that. So the next piece that I want to talk to you about is, what can we do to make things better? How can we tackle things and fix things? And what are some examples of change that we really want to think about? So I'm going to give you 4 challenges and ask you to really adopt them as ways to make things better going forward. So the first one is to be bold, right? And what does that mean? It means, in the face of leadership that maybe is afraid to take on a major challenge, you be bold. You bring it forward. Have big ideas, right? Think as big as the world, and take those challenges, push against people who are not willing to make the changes that are required, and bring those big ideas forward. Be fearless about it. So I'll give you a quick example. The city of Calgary, Calgary is a city that has kind of wide ranging, it's like a large geographic area that makes up the city. And there's been a real interest in single-family dwellings throughout the city. But they recently made, not a perfect, but a much improved change to their zoning laws. And their zoning laws now affect the entire city and will allow all kinds of new housing structures to be placed inside the city. So laneway housing, multiple unit housing, multi-generation housing, all within areas that previously had been kind of segregated as single-family dwellings. That's an incredible change. It required a real battle through the city council and some trading back and forth about it, but it's a really big move. And so zoning across Ontario, across Canada, can really change to make place for more housing, more kinds of housing for more people. That's a big first step. So in your domain, whatever it might be, may not be in housing, maybe in something else, maybe in food, or maybe in health, be bold, right? Think about the boldest thing that you could do and bring it forward. The next thing is to think in systems. So we have a tendency as humans to really focus on the minutia of something. This is my area of expertise. This is my individual competency or domain that I want to worry about. But what we really need to do is to think systemically. So I'm going to give you a different example. And so this is the Way Home project in Houston that looked at a radical, it's hard to think of it as radical now, but a radical way to deal with homelessness within the city. So Houston in 2012 had one of the worst homeless rates in the United States. Most extensive number of people unhoused in the United States, and really wanted to tackle that issue in a different way. And so what they did is they developed a local homeless response system. And what that system did was it brought multiple groups of people together with one lead agency coordinating the efforts. So rather than a whole series of agencies either providing clothing or food or shelter to people or some social services, the entire system was coordinated. Was that hard? Yes, it was really hard. They had over 100 agencies that had to somehow try and work together, to not be so focused on their own territoriality, but to bring their thinking together and their efforts together in a much more coordinated way. And so they thought of it as a system with all the parts of the system. So mental health supports, physical shelter supports, moving people towards work if that was appropriate for them and possible for them, disability supports. So the whole system started to work together. And so over time, they haven't completely eliminated homelessness, but in the first 10 years of their work, they made a really huge dent in the effort. And so that's a really different way to tackle a project. I know I've worked with groups here in Ontario and seen how not divisive, but maybe territorial groups of agencies can be about their own particular zone of action. And by coming together and seeing how the whole system works, they're able to accomplish so much more. So for you, in your own domain, think about what the system is. What are the elements of the system? Who are the players in the system? And how can you bring it together to really make change happen in an entirely different way? And that would benefit cities overall. The next thing to encourage you to do, which is like an offshoot of thinking in systems, is to collaborate. And so, as Vivek said before, like we need to be collaborative, right? And so I'm going to give you a shameless plug of a project that I'm working on. So I am part of the Future Cities initiative here at the University of Waterloo. And so we recently launched the Future Cities Institute, which is a research and connection institute that has begun the work of trying to do interdisciplinary research and to find partners and really work across sectors to make a difference. And so if you work in a municipality and you'd like to be part of it, that's great, let us know. But an interesting offshoot of that I believe is starting in the fall is the idea of not just on a major research level, working with professors, but also students working on a capstone project. So across the whole of the University of Waterloo community, so all the different schools, I think it's all the schools, at the university, students can come together and work collaboratively on a capstone project that is connected to a real-world problem. So it's an opportunity to learn how to work across different disciplines and with the outside world to develop a useful solution to a complex problem. And so that's a pretty exciting initiative going forward. That's the last of my self-plugging. I wanted also to share the experience of a colleague of mine, Rani Lee, who is a designer in Toronto, who developed a project with multiple partners. So a collaboration, again, across disciplines. She's a designer. She works with, and also a professor, she works with students. And together, they approached Cadillac Fairview, which owns malls in Toronto and all over the place, I think, who had a problem. They had empty space within their malls. And so she said, I've got a great solution for that empty space. And so built out this design lab that would give the corporate partner the ability to animate space, great for them, they win, and the students an opportunity to have a space to work. But they didn't stop there. They also included recent immigrant and refugee women who had specific skills in sewing to come in and use the space and develop products using leftover materials, marketing materials, and turn them into bags and wallets and purses and all kinds of stuff. So multiple partners working together, collaborating so that they all win. The women got skills that they could use in Canada and built some business and some income. The companies that used their materials turned it into a circular opportunity. The corporate partner had a way to look good. They offered the space for free. And the design students learned, and Rani, as an overall designer, had a new opportunity as well. So great collaboration, win-win, win-win-win, right? And so you can do that too. And then finally, design the future now. That's my business, is I'm always designing the future. Excuse me. And so you can design the future now too. So you got to think about what's coming and then prepare in the present. And so I want to show you 3 examples that are related to the Sustainable Development Goals. There's a university in Europe called the SOIF. Looking at international futures, so the School of International Futures, worked with a series of organizations that were trying to improve their strategy, their offering, by using foresight, using futures thinking. So the first thing that they did is they taught them how to embed foresight in their strategies. And so here's an example of something that they did. They worked with WaterAid, who helped to offer clean water and hygiene globally, around the world. They work in all different areas around the world. But they were finding that their strategy was really not failing, but diminished because they were facing such huge challenges. And the work that they did embracing futures thinking was to say, you know what? It's not all bad in the future. We can also dream of a better future and have a possible better future through strategy. And so by innovating and developing new mindsets internally, they were able to build out new approaches to what they were trying to do in a really challenging global time. So that's the first one. The second one, or the second idea, is to transform by including diverse voices and agency into the work that you do. So many of you already do that, but go further, right? And so foresight as an activity is rarely ever practiced individually, and it's way better if you have a variety of people at the table. And so having local voices be part of the conversation to develop better solutions is always a benefit. And so this is the Open Society Foundation that wanted to develop intergenerational fairness tools. And so they used the concept of strategic foresight as a way to develop new solutions that would actually prepare places, cities, countries, to really include ideas for the next generation. Not for now, not to be selfish for how I'm going to benefit, but to prepare the ground, like in Indigenous teachings of 7 generations forward. How do you prepare for other generations and make it possible for them to thrive and survive? And then finally, find new ways to deliver those SDGs beyond the 2030 agenda. So as we heard before, it looks like most nations will not accomplish inclusion or achievement of the Sustainable Development Goals by 2030. 2030 is only 5.5 years from now. That's a really short amount of time, and we have lots of work to do. So how can we get to that place? And so again, by using futures thinking, maybe we can incorporate new approaches. And so I've worked with the the WHO in Mongolia to rethink how the SDGs could be incorporated into their delivery of a healthcare plan. Right? So it's a really comprehensive look involving people on the ground and trying to develop new approaches. And so again, for you, so part of the conference theme is to think about innovation. And so if you're thinking about innovation, thinking about new solutions to complex problems, how can you include new approaches to delivering those SDGs in the next 5.5 years, right? Tall order. Okay, so my next question is, are you ready? Are each and every one of you, so you're here today to think about making big change, about how you can re-energize the work that you do. Are you ready for the future that's coming? I'm hoping that you are. I'm hoping that you can take these steps. And so we talked about cities, but in a more general way. I'm happy to answer any other questions that you would like afterwards. But most importantly, I want you to be ready for the conference, but I also want you to be ready for the work that needs to be done. It's a lot, but you're able. Thank you.
Thank you, Helen, for sharing such an insightful talk about designing the future now. I'm going to be bold and say I'm ready.
You're ready? Good.
So we do have a few minutes left before our break for the audience to ask any questions. Please enter your questions into Slido, and we will have those questions read out for you. Or for our in-person audience, I believe we have some microphones available if you would like to raise your hand and ask your question directly.
There's a question right there.
Hi, thank you for your excellent presentation. I really enjoyed it. My name is Stephanie Korchnovis. I'm a PhD student here at the Balsillie School. In my own research, I'm interested in applying DMDU methods, decision-making under deep uncertainty, and I'm partially involved with a project doing that at the Waterloo Climate Intervention Strategies Lab. My question was, how do you go about incorporating methodological approaches to foresight, and what does that necessarily entail? Does that include engaging with communities and experts and interviews, different data and indicators?
Great question, and decision-making with deep uncertainty is my life, so thank you. So that's a great question. So it's interesting, we live in a really quantitative world, right? And so people generally value quantitative information, numeric justification of solutions way more than they do qualitative information. But I would say, so for my work, first of all, there are no facts about the future. It hasn't happened yet, right? So it's not certain. You can look towards the future, but it's not certain. So you need to also use qualitative methods. And foresight as a practice might seem, for some people, oh, you're just kind of making that up, but we don't do that. We follow really rigorous methodology, so a whole series of method approaches. I can talk to you later about some that are of interest maybe for you. But the point is to follow rigorous methodology, to involve communities wherever possible, because their voices matter, and their qualitative responses to situations are really informative. So it's a necessary piece of the puzzle. However, if you only do that and you leave out all quantitative information, people are suspect about that. So an integration of both, I think, is always really useful and important. So making sure that there is diverse and representative engagement, and then also supplementing it with other more literature review and data research as well, and bringing the two together, I've found is really productive and helpful, and also convincing, which is important. Does that answer your question? Yeah?
Hi, here. Sorry.
Sorry, in the dark. Hi. Yeah.
Hi, thanks for your presentation. Stéphane Roche from Laval University, Quebec City.
Oh, great.
You rapidly mentioned digital transition, smart city, AI as a challenge as well as a solution.
For some, yes.
For some, and I'm just wondering if you or if you include in your prospective reflection the stake about the sobriety. You know, this idea of trying to use digital technology in a new way, more sober, in a sober way, because most of the prospective studies show that the part the part of the technology that is responsible for environmental impact will increase a lot in the next future, and probably this is the part that will increase most rapidly.
Yep.
And the most. And so most of those prospective studies show that if we do not find a new way of engaging technology, the impact will be so important that even if we, for example, decarbonize transportation, the gain we will make in those activity will be compensated by the digital technology, the increase of those part of our activities.
That's a really interesting question. So I'm going to summarize it by saying, is there a sober second thought? Is that correct? And so I work often with municipalities, with mayors and regional authorities, also with provinces and the federal government. And there is a very large thrall about the potential of technology. And it's true. Like, technology really does have monumental possibilities. But the way that we deploy it, understanding the human impact and the human consequence of it is not always as fully developed. And so when we prepare, so one of the things that we do is we create possible scenarios of the future. We make a point of including ones that either challenge the idea of technological inclusion or suggest the other side of the story as a point of reflection, because I think it's a necessary point of reflection, and we don't spend enough time doing it. In fact, what we tend to do is either fully dismiss it, which is not helpful, or fully embrace it. But the middle ground, where we have that sort of thoughtful discourse about what the implications are. So I talked about Elon Musk before, saying that all jobs are going to be gone. And he put a caveat to that to say, that won't be so bad. And all I could think of was, okay, maybe it's not going to be so bad for you, but for everybody else, like, how are we going to eat? So there needs to be, so if there's an embrace of some levels of technology, there's a necessary corresponding shift in policy. How do we distribute the wealth that is created by that in a way that everybody can eat, and everybody can have a home, and everybody can clothe themselves, right? In a way that is appropriate and fulfilling. So we really need to have those complex discussions at a time when the push to sort of incorporate technology is very great, right? And so that's why I say a sober second thought, I think, is a necessary skill. Not rejection, because there's real benefit that we can improve our emissions scores, or improve transportation, or improve housing, but only if we think about it carefully, I would say.
Just wanted to check if there was any questions from Slido. We have time for one more question.
Working? Yes. So the question is, what does a smart or digital transition mean for rural and indigenous communities?
That also is a great question, and there's a real need for our governing system to pay attention to that. So there's a real digital divide between places that don't have current access to the most speedy and kind of fully widely accessible technology, not just the internet, but the incorporation of technology into, city or sort of township affairs. And so increasingly, there's an intention from governing bodies, usually provincial, to try and make sure that there's more broad distribution of the underlying technology access ability. But I would say it is not nearly far enough along right now. And so I can't fix that, but you can, implore your regional elected officials to really pay attention to it. It's not only a corporate thing, although that's part of it. It also needs to be a policy.
We have one more then. Why do we separate the notion of aging from disability, and how are the housing and mobility concerns different?
Well, that's a huge conversation. Maybe we could do that later because I'm doing another panel about that. But why do we separate aging and disability? Because people who are not aging also have disabilities. Although it is true that not everybody who ages has a diminished capacity, but many people do physically or maybe even cognitively. And so the special needs attached to that are important to identify. And for housing in particular, again, although we're going to talk about that during the panel discussion, your needs. So everybody talks about aging in place. So my own mother has recently been experiencing cognitive decline and is no longer safe to live at home. It's a tragedy for her. She wants nothing more than to live at home, but she lives very far from her children. She lives in the country, in another province. And so we're not able to be the assistance, and there's no local capacity to help her age in place. Right? She's physically very fit, but cognitively, it's not so safe for her to live alone anymore. And so how do we accommodate that? She's got a beautiful home that she can physically live in, but there's no facilities from a service perspective to enable her to do that. And so are we thinking about that part? It's not just the physical space with fewer stairs and better bathtubs. It's also all the services that need to be provided to enable somebody to live in place. And so whether there's somebody with a disability or somebody who's aging with a disability, can they do that?
Thank you. I see we have one last question from a member of the audience.
Thank you. I really enjoyed your presentation, so thank you for that. And something that struck me when you said to be bold. So I work for an organization. It's a nonprofit called Liftoff, and we help Black entrepreneurs to start businesses. But by profession, I am an RPN, which is a registered practical nurse. And so I work a lot with seniors. So piggybacking off what you just said about housing and seniors, also the question of diversity in seniors housing. Because for one of the things that I've noticed, I've worked in a lot of seniors homes as director of care or as a regular floor nurse. And what I noticed is that there's a lot of homes for the population to age, but for when you talk about inclusivity and diversity, there are no homes for people that look like me, specifically, right? And is the government also thinking about that aspect? Because also one of the biggest challenges when you're dealing with businesses is funding and financing. And is there anything included in the plan going forward for housing, not just for the general population, for also diversity? Because when you go into housing as seniors, what I've noticed for people that look like me, when the workers don't know what to do with the hair, they cut it off. And so that is not something that is acceptable.
Yeah.
And so I would like to see more included in the plan going forward for diversity for people that look like me.
Well said. Very well said. I don't have an answer to that. I think you need to call the politicians, but totally well said. And of course, right, we're not all the same. And we need to acknowledge that we're not all the same. We don't all want to live in the same way, right? Some people want to live closer to their family. Some people want to live really independently. It's really necessary that we, just as we said before, bringing the quantitative and the qualitative together. So those qualitative characteristics that describe what you need and want as you as an individual person, and then you as a group of people, whatever, and then all aging people. How do we make it possible? I think it requires real flexible and creative thinking to solve those problems, not just, you know, one averaging answer that's supposed to suit everybody, but in the end suits nobody. Yeah.
Thank you so much, the audience, for asking such wonderful questions. With the interest of time, we unfortunately have to conclude the Q&A session. However, with the break coming up next, we encourage you to have a continue the conversation out in the foyer where enjoying coffee and tea. And thank you, Helen, for opening such a great first session for this conference. We will now commence with a short break, but before that, for our audience here in person, please be back in the auditorium for 11 a.m., and we will continue to our first panel of the day, Future of Housing in Canada, moderated by Helen. And a reminder that there's refreshments in the foyer, and for those of you who are online, please feel free to make yourself a cup of coffee or tea, do a few stretches, and tune back in for 11 o'clock. And another round of applause for Helen, please.